White. I am a partner with High Road Community Planning and Analytics with my colleague Rusty Weaver. We are the lead consultant on the housing needs assessment here for Cattaraugus County. We've teamed up with Clark Patterson Lee, who is one of the Pendo Works, and Harrison Studios, who's not here. We'll bring Harrison in sort of later into this project. So we're here effectively to try to lead the county, the land bank, individual municipalities, stakeholders, anyone that we can kind of get in front of in this effort to try to develop a set of actionable strategies that the county can use to address identified housing needs and housing gaps. So these meetings, so this is the fourth of four, so I think this is probably the best turnout. I wasn't at the Olean one, but we're happy that we have this level of turnout here. Our goal is to really try to get some feedback today and not necessarily spend a ton of time running through sort of data and issues and things like that. Just want to give you a quick background on the project approach, where community engagement kind of fits into this process, and then some of quick background of the expertise of this project team, just so I always feel like there needs to be a level of comfort that the people standing in front of you are qualified to do this work. I'm a full-time college professor at Buffalo State, so I always try to make sure that I tell students, you know, you have to feel comfortable with me in this classroom and my expertise, and I try to stay within the bounds of what I know rather than trying to dabble in what I don't know, right? So I try to keep it within those guardrails. Our project approach is pretty, I think it's somewhat unique, but also somewhat kind of what everybody does when they get into these projects. But my colleague and I are both trained urban geographers, both PhDs from UB. We tend to look at everything geographically, right? We don't look at everything sort of as a sort of monolith. So when we look at a county, we're looking at a county as an overall market in and of itself, right? So when we think about Cattaraugus County, we look at it as a singular housing market. But within that singular housing market are a bunch of submarkets, right? And so our goal is to really understand the difference between the submarkets in your county, how they interact, what opportunities they might offer. So when we get sort of further down the road, we start looking at what options we might have. We recognize that they're not all the same, right? The housing market in Ellicottville is fundamentally different and absolutely not the same thing even close to somewhere down like in Portville, right? So they're two different things. So we want to make sure that we understand each of those markets for what they are, right? Unique individual places, right? So we've done this in Erie County, we've done this in Erie and Niagara counties for some nonprofits. So the process of undertaking this type of project really is it's sort of lengthy, right? So we'll be here working on this project through the middle part of 2026. Right now, our real main effort is actually sort of not really on here, right? Our goal is this is our sort of process, but what we're going to do is we're going to use community engagement in this manner in an online survey that we're going to do to kind of feed into here. So we want to always understand what's happening in your county in terms of plans, programs, strategies, those types of things that intersect with housing in some way, shape, or form. We'll collect a ton of data on population and demographics, housing market data, so vacancy, occupancy, how much money people are spending on rent, how much money people are spending on mortgages. We'll look at vacancy, so we do a full-blown drive-by windshield survey in the spring, looking for vacant units in our community, so we have an understanding and grasp of what that kind of looks like, and that's particularly important to organizations and entities like the land bank. So eventually we'll take all this data and we'll do a sub-market analysis of all the different components that exist in these spaces. Out of that, we hope to develop some opportunity assessment and sort of strategy that the county, the land bank, and other stakeholders, whether those are individual developers, nonprofits, what can those organizations and entities do, if anything, to kind of leverage assets and opportunities that exist in the county to address identified housing market needs. It's thinking about the organizational component of this project. Yep.
Question before you go too much further. With the engagement and the demographic information that you're talking about, would all of that information be shareable to all of the communities for their long-term strategic plans? So if you look at the long-term study, long-term plan of the town, all that information is what is needed to gather. And what I'm saying is, can that be shareable so that there's one place that's gathering this information that can be shared throughout the entire county?
Yeah, so let me try to answer that, and then I'll ask the land bank and county staff if I'm right, wrong, or indifferent. Generally speaking, when we collect data for this project, we are collecting it at a countywide level and at the census tract level. So when we get down to the census tract level, we're not necessarily collecting it at the municipal level, if that makes any sense, right? So we treat municipalities as singular standalone entities for policy reasons, which is they set because of home rule authority, they set land use, zoning, subdivision regulations, site plan, architecture, all that stuff. So we will look at municipalities as standalones when we try to understand the rules that exist in those places. But when we look at the market and the county as a whole, we're looking at the tracts. That data is probably shareable, but it won't be shareable necessarily in an easily digestible form, because the final report will have more maps, but we're not going to have pages of census tract level data in that report. The second part I would say that I think is important, and I've had this conversation with Kate and the land bank board, it's highly likely that, I'll say this, it's 100% likely that in this final report, the first action strategy we will recommend is that you do a countywide housing strategy, which is fundamentally different than what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is really a needs assessment and an analysis of the overall housing market and submarkets. That does not necessarily tell everybody what to do. And the reason for that is we have not engaged directly with local governments on this project. And to your point, the comprehensive plans or neighborhood plans or area plans and other geographies in the county need to be engaged in this process, because ultimately, if we take one step back to that home rule, the lines on the maps matter, they're the ones that have to be involved in deciding what happens in their community, right? So there has to be some secondary approach that gathers those stakeholders, local governments, building code enforcement officers, those types of people, into this process. Now we're going to ask local government to sit down in stakeholder meetings in the early part of 2026, right? So we ask them what they can tell us. But in terms of feeding data that directly supports local comprehensive planning, we can give you stuff probably at the tract level, maybe some municipal level stuff. But certainly see me after. If you have a need for data and information that we have, we'll share it.
And I'm looking at it from the standpoint, okay, there's companies out there that provide that information that's at a cost. And I'm looking at it, and just from what you're telling me, is, okay, you're gathering all this information, we should be able to query that down, not necessarily, like you said, to the home rule type of level, but if we're looking at population, income levels, those kind of things, I think you'd be able to get that out for them. And those are all part of that strategic plan.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a data guy, and I work for IBM, so I understand this stuff probably better than most. So it's queryable data to me, and be able to separate those pieces out, and then be able to hand those out to the municipalities to help them. And that's all I'm trying to say is, can we do this? And I think we can, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and we're not, so there's a difference between what's queryable and what is downloaded. So when we go, so you should, to me, I would never, and I'm a data junkie, so I would never pay for data. I just know that the data we're talking about here is one of two things. What is census data that the federal government collects, aggregates, and reports, or the government that local data has to cough up because it's local information. So when we collect it from the census, from the federal government, whenever that opens back up again, because we're currently unable to get anything off the census website, it's literally on lockdown. When that data comes out, we choose census tract as our query, our geography, and we collect the data that way. So it's not, without getting way down the rabbit hole, it's not easy to then aggregate the census tracts to municipal boundaries for a whole host of data reasons, right? So yeah, see me after, we'll have a conversation. I think I can get you probably some of the stuff you're after. Okay.
And it's not just for one municipality. I'm thinking for.
Yeah. So if we can figure out a way where we can tool it up and we can get it in a municipal level form, without a significant effort to do that, then we're certainly open to do that. And if Rusty was, you guys, some of you have seen, Rusty's a data, he lives and breathes data. It's his favorite thing. So if you ask him to collect more data, he's usually super happy to collect more data, right? So if he was here, he probably would have told you, yeah, I'll just do it and we'll have this conversation's over, right? But if I say that, then I'm throwing him under the bus because he's the one who's got to do it generally. So yeah, see me after, I'll share some contact info. Our community engagement process is relatively straightforward. We have a steering committee that exists at the land bank level, right? We have a project website which can be accessed through the link here, so you can take a snapshot of it. We could share the we can share the PowerPoint slide online and with the county, and they could spread it out. These stakeholder meetings, so this is the fourth of four. So we did Olean, Little Valley, Franklinville, and here, Perrysburg. Okay. I'm going to ask a quick question, sort of here. How did everybody here find out about this meeting? Because we're everybody's pointing at Crystal, right? because we obviously we're done with community meetings, but it's always informative, I think, in the future how the best way to communicate with people is. In this day and age, it's harder to figure out the multiple pathways to get people out. So, how many of you found it on social media? Nobody? One?
I got a message from Tom Clerk, said be there.
Oh, okay. You were told to be here, so shamed into it, right? Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, we did.
Any publications, so local newspapers, flyers, public, Penny Saver. Did Penny Saver do it as a public hearing announcement, or was it?
We bought an ad.
Bought an ad.
Yeah, we
Okay.
just listed it.
Anyone get an email from an organization that might have been interested in housing that said, "Hey, there's this meeting, go."
Actually, the county sent out, sent out stuff through email and that as well.
Yeah. So they did yeoman's work trying to get people out to these meetings, right? The last one, this last sort of general public opportunity is we will publish an online survey somewhere mid-November through somewhere mid-December, asking a bunch of questions about individuals and households' experience with housing. So questions, from how do you rate the quality of your house, how do you rate the quality of housing in your community, those types of simple questions, so that we can add to what we find out in these meetings. And then in early 2026, which isn't on here, we're going to try to get two sort of distinctive stakeholder groups together to meet. One is the building code enforcement, local government officials group, to try to see what we can get from them. And probably maybe bring if we can identify builders and developers into that space too, because they have the relationship with working with land use and zoning requirements in local government. And then a separate meeting with other stakeholders that would include social organizations, nonprofits, people that have work that's tangential to housing, so things like nonprofit affordable housing organizations that exist, social services providers that have a housing need or housing relationship. We'll do that as well to kind of inform some of this information. So same process here. We'll blow this information out as many ways as we possibly can. One thing that would be super helpful for us to raise the response rate on this is to actually, if you get an email, share it with other people, right? That's what the purpose I thought of social media was. I'm not on it, so I don't know. But generally speaking, the ability to share that and pass it around and create a sort of web of people, the more people we can get to answer these questions, the better the responses tend to be, the more information. The bottom line is there's oftentimes we find out information that we would have never suspected from one person's survey. Right, and that can be super powerful and super impactful when putting a kind of final effort into putting a strategy or recommendations together, because we don't really want to miss anything. So just real quick, the work that Rusty and I have done has been predominantly in housing and neighborhoods since we both walked out of grad school sometime around 2012 or 13. We worked in urban and rural communities, right? Urban, suburban, rural, so we've worked across that. Sort of different types of geographies. Our most recent sort of large housing project, housing needs assessment, was actually in Seneca County. Some of the same issues that we've already identified here, and we've had conversations with the land bank staff as well. You have a lot of what they sort of have, which is one really dominant housing market. Kind of yours is in the middle of the county, kind of having a really often outsized impact on the overall market in terms of prices and rents. They have the same tourist problem. Tons of Airbnbs, tons of VRBOs, people scooping those up and taking them out of the portfolio so that people that live in the community struggle to find units. So there are a lot of similarities. And so we're always interested in trying to find out what's similar, what's different, what works and what doesn't. Just real quick, I'm not going to bore everyone with a ton of data. We try to just give everybody a snapshot of data variables that relate to housing in some way, shape, or form, right? So obviously we know the two most important data points here are probably population and households, right? Because population and households directly dictate supply, right? If you think about it. You can have population decline and have household increase, right? And so most people think, we have Buffalo, we have population decline for 75 years. But when we look at the data in the city of Buffalo from 1970 until today, we've seen that the county and the region has generally lost about 20% of its population. We have 18% increase in households, which means we have to respond to that increase, even though we have population decrease, we have to respond to that increase with construction to build more housing, right? So, unfortunately in the case here, you have a dual decline. Households have declined and population has declined. And we add that into things like median household income. When we adjust for inflation, that's declined. Not substantially, but it's often a challenging reality when your median household income declines. Median household is every single household in your county, which is functionally different than median family. Median family tends to always be higher and tends to always go up. And the reason for that is mostly that traditionally family households tend to have dual income. So the dual income family household tends to have higher incomes. So that's not an unknown or unexpected reality. It's all the other ones that are somewhat challenging, right? Your units are down, right? Units get taken out of the marketplace through demolition. They're lost in, a few get lost in fires here and there. Sometimes your units get decreased when someone buys a double to convert it into a single, right? So nothing really critical here. And when you lose households and you have a household decline and a unit decline, that's okay, right? That's generally a good tandem. You want that thing. But the challenge you guys have is you have a relatively high vacancy rate, which I know when we look at the vacancy rate, a lot of it is seasonal, right? So that's not a necessarily problematic issue. We'll dig a little bit deeper in to try to understand what vacancy really looks like across the county, right? So we know that I looked right away, I think it's somewhere on the order of 7,000 plus vacant units total, and about 5,000 or so of those are seasonal, right? So not a huge portion of your vacancy is necessarily what you'd see vacant single family that someone just abandoned or walked away from. It's more seasonal. On the other hand, even with relatively stagnant median household income, some median family income increase, your rents are relatively affordable compared to other parts of our region. Right? So if we look at the 7-county region or the 5-county region, your rents are actually pretty affordable, right? And they're actually affordable to people making the median, which is a critically important relationship, which is how much can the median household afford when it comes to median rent without being overburdened. You guys are actually in pretty good shape. The bigger challenge, though, is that we see this effectively everywhere, is that when you look at renters tend to be, at the lower income scale, so median or lower incomes, and they tend to be the ones that are most vulnerable to increases in rents. So even that small increase in rent from $576 to $759, roughly about $200, someone making minimum wage or sort of low skilled job wage isn't necessarily going to see that type of raise on an annual basis where they can offset that very easily. So that's where we get to this 30% threshold, which is generally the acceptable threshold for what we think is affordability. So anyone spending over 30% of their monthly income is considered to be taxed or rent burdened, right, or insecure. And those numbers are relatively high, but they're high everywhere.
Is that on the 25-29 data, is that 47% adjusted for the inflation like your other numbers are?
No, it's not an inflation number. It's a count. It's 47% of the population
Oh, that's
of the household.
That's population.
Yeah, so it's 47% of households are spending that. and it's based on the year that it was collected, right? So in that time period, 2005, 2009, 47% of your households were spending more in those dollars. So that would have been $2,009.
So that's $2,009.
Yep, and now we adjust, this is,
And then you adjusted it for 23.
that's 2023 dollars. So there's no inflation adjustment when we look at households, right? When we look at the actual, how much they're spending in a snapshot period of time. So, not a super pretty picture, but I would argue most of this data is really more on the stability side than it is on the everything is crumbling on us side. It's not uncommon to see this in a lot of individual municipalities. In fact, if we pull data in Erie and Niagara County and we look at them as individual municipalities, 64 individual municipalities in those two counties, it's often we'll find trends that look like this. It's not the end of the world.
So the question on, like I said, the median gross income, the gross rent, if you're looking at that and you're saying a monthly rate of $759 in 2023, does that include those rents for the VRBO type of things?
No,
So those are not included.
VRBOs are not included in the census count of rent.
So this
value.
is only true monthly renters.
Yep. So it basically, the reason is, if you're in a
It
VRBO,
would be skewed.
if you're in a VRBO, you don't check the mail, right? So when that census form comes to the VRBO, the owner gets it. Well, the owner just sends it back and says this is a seasonal, and it's gone. The rent doesn't get calculated. The rent only gets calculated in the household that you live in, your unit. That's where you respond to how much you spend.
Yeah, I was just looking at the cost per month. I was like, if those were included, that number would be much higher probably.
Right. You got to remember, they're trying to make their whole month
Correct.
on 4 weekends.
Right.
So their nightly cost is very high, right? And remember, they're dinging Toronto, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, right? That's who they're dinging in Ellicottville. They're coming in and they're willing to spend that for a couple nights and they go home, right? It's a short-term vacation. Do you have a question?
Yeah, does that also include like your Section 8 housing? Because that's driving up the rent and go on to hard because of what they're willing to pay versus what the median income is.
Yeah, there's questionable causality between Section 8 having that much of an impact on overall rents. I'll just say that.
Come spend an afternoon with me. I'll be happy to answer all your questions. Because it does.
Okay, well, we can have that conversation.
Absolutely.
Anyone else before we move on? No. So, just real quick, jobs are critically important to this market, critically important to every single housing market, undeniably. You've seen in, roughly about a 14-year period a decline in total jobs in the county, right? So when you have a decline in total jobs in the county, it explains why you have a decline in population. If jobs go away, people go away, right? And then the visualization here might be a little bit sort of wonky, but the bottom line is the arrow on the left in both is the number of people outside the county that are coming to the county and work in the county. The circular one is the number of people live in the county and work in the county, and the arrow to the right is the number of people live in the county and work in another county, right? So if you look at it on balance, you have fewer people coming into your county to work, and you have more people going out of your county to work, right? And then you have relatively a similar number of people that are in the county that work in the county. And those numbers don't change all that much, that sort of distribution.
How does that affect the people working from home?
Yeah, so work from home, it would be counted in the middle circle, right? So work from home, if you live in Cattaraugus County and you work from home, you work in Cattaraugus County, right?
Do you know what counties they work to?
I don't know. I could get you that information. Rusty probably has it pretty easily too. I'm sure a good chunk of it is probably people that are just on the southern border that go into Pennsylvania, into Bradford and places like that. It's usually people, generally speaking, on the boundaries, right, that want to be, there's probably a good chunk that maybe in northern Cattaraugus County, kind of where we are, that are commuting up into the city or the south towns for jobs. That would be my guess, that it's north and south, right, that it's some going north and some are going south. And less so east and west because they have probably the same number of jobs and the same challenges that you experience here. We'll skip this stuff, right, we'll keep moving. So the last, I I don't want to get into that data. We'll throw it up there and you can disseminate it, right? So why we're here is we're trying to figure out the larger circles. Right? We know this much. We don't live here. Right? We don't experience the housing market the way you do or your children do, right? So you guys have vastly more embedded, ingrained knowledge than we could possibly have. So our goal is to take what we can collect from data sources and supplement that with on-the-ground knowledge from individual households, specific stakeholders, local governments, anybody that can add to the conversation. We would like to get that information. So we're trying to figure out what is known here, and then we'll try to figure out what we don't know, right? Take all that information together, kind of mash it into some data and some analysis, and try to see what new information could be created out of all that information that we collect. And then from there, we'll start drafting some product here in early 2026, and get drafts out for review somewhere in early spring, right? So that's I think that's all I have